Sergeant Marcus Thompson was adjusting his helmet when the ground beneath his boots began to tremble. At first, he thought it was another convoy of heavy military vehicles passing through their temporary base camp in the disaster relief zone. But as the trembling intensified into violent shaking, Marcus realized this was something far more serious. The earthquake hit with devastating force, measuring 7.2 on the Richter scale. Buildings that had already been weakened from previous disasters began collapsing like dominoes. Marcus watched in horror as a 3-story apartment complex across the street folded in on itself, sending clouds of dust and debris billowing through the air. The ground cracked open in jagged lines, swallowing parked cars and chunks of pavement. Marcus had been deployed to this region 3 weeks earlier as part of a humanitarian mission. His unit was providing aid to communities still recovering from flooding that had occurred months before. Now Mother Nature was delivering another devastating blow to people who had already lost so much. As the shaking subsided, an eerie silence fell over the area. Then came the screams. People emerged from damaged buildings covered in dust, calling out for missing family members. Marcus immediately sprang into action, his military training taking over. He began coordinating with his fellow soldiers to establish a rescue operation. The scene was chaotic. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, but many of the local first responders were dealing with their own emergencies. Marcus and his team knew they would be among the primary rescue forces for the next several hours, possibly days. As Marcus surveyed the destruction, he heard something that made him pause. Beneath the sounds of human distress, there was another sound, a desperate whimpering coming from somewhere nearby. It was the unmistakable cry of an animal in distress. Marcus looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. The whimpering seemed to be coming from the direction of a collapsed convenience store. The building's roof had caved in completely, and concrete blocks were scattered everywhere. Marcus approached carefully, testing each step to make sure the ground would support his weight. The crying became louder as he got closer. It was definitely a dog, and from the sound of it, the animal was trapped somewhere beneath the rubble. Marcus called out to his teammate, Corporal Johnson, who was helping evacuate people from a nearby damaged house. "Johnson, I need you over here," Marcus shouted. "There's an animal trapped under this debris." Johnson jogged over, wiping sweat and dust from his forehead. "Sarge, shouldn't we focus on finding people first?" Marcus understood Johnson's concern. Their primary mission was to save human lives. But something about the desperate cries of this trapped animal touched his heart. Growing up on a farm in rural Kentucky, Marcus had always felt a special connection to animals. His childhood dog Rex had been his best friend for 12 years. "I know, but this will only take a few minutes," Marcus replied. "Besides, if there's a dog trapped here, there might be people trapped here too." The two soldiers began carefully moving chunks of concrete and twisted metal. The dog's cries grew more intense as if the animal sensed that help was coming. Marcus could tell the dog was scared but still alive and alert. After about 10 minutes of careful excavation, they found the source of the crying. A medium-sized golden retriever was pinned beneath a large concrete beam. The dog appeared to be injured but conscious. Her tail wagged weakly when she saw the soldiers approaching. "Easy, girl, we're going to get you out of here," Marcus said softly, reaching out his hand for the dog to smell. Despite her pain and fear, the dog managed to lick his fingers. Marcus examined the situation carefully. The concrete beam was heavy, probably weighing several hundred pounds. But it was positioned in such a way that if they could lift it just a few inches, the dog could crawl out. However, they would need to be extremely careful not to cause further collapse of the surrounding debris. "Johnson, help me lift this beam on my count," Marcus instructed. "We need to lift it straight up, just enough for her to get free." The two men positioned themselves on either side of the beam. Marcus could see that the dog's left hind leg appeared to be injured, but she was trying to position herself to crawl out as soon as there was enough space. 1, 2, 3, lift, Marcus grunted. The beam rose slowly. The dog immediately began to squirm toward freedom, dragging her injured leg behind her. As soon as she was clear, the soldiers gently lowered the beam back down. The golden retriever collapsed a few feet away, panting heavily. Marcus knelt beside her and carefully examined her injuries. Her left leg was definitely hurt, possibly broken, and she had several cuts from the debris, but her eyes were bright and alert. "What should we do with her, Sarge?" Johnson asked. "The medical teams are overwhelmed with human casualties," Marcus looked down at the injured dog who was now trying to lick his hand again despite her pain. He made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "We'll figure something out," he said, gently scooping the dog into his arms. "I'm not leaving her here to die." Marcus carried the injured golden retriever back to the temporary medical station that had been set up in a large tent near their base camp. The military medics were completely overwhelmed treating human casualties, but Marcus managed to get the attention of Corporal Sarah Mitchell, who had some veterinary training from her civilian job. "I know this isn't protocol, but can you take a quick look at her leg?" Marcus asked, still cradling the dog in his arms. Sarah glanced around to make sure her commanding officer wasn't watching, then quickly examined the dog's injuries. "The leg isn't broken, but it's badly sprained. These cuts need cleaning too. I can bandage her up, but you'll need to keep her quiet and limit her movement." While Sarah worked on the dog's injuries, Marcus noticed something remarkable. Despite her pain, the golden retriever remained calm and cooperative during the treatment. She seemed to understand that these humans were trying to help her. When Sarah cleaned the cuts with antiseptic, the dog winced but didn't try to bite or struggle. "She's got a great temperament," Sarah observed. "Most dogs would be snapping at us by now, especially after trauma like this." Marcus had been thinking the same thing. This dog was special somehow. She had a gentle, trusting nature that reminded him of his childhood pet Rex. After Sarah finished the bandaging, Marcus carefully placed the dog on a blanket in the corner of his tent. "I'm going to call you Hope," he said, stroking her golden fur, "because finding you alive under all that rubble gives me hope that we'll find other survivors too." Hope's tail wagged weakly at the sound of his voice. Despite everything she had been through, she seemed to sense that she was safe now. Marcus gave her some water and a piece of his military ration, which she ate gratefully. Over the next few days, Marcus and his unit worked tirelessly in the rescue efforts. They pulled 17 people from collapsed buildings and helped evacuate hundreds more from dangerous structures. The work was exhausting and emotionally draining. Every night, Marcus would return to his tent physically and mentally exhausted, but Hope was always there waiting for him. As her leg healed, she became more mobile and started following Marcus around the camp. The other soldiers quickly adopted her as their unofficial mascot. She had a calming effect on everyone, and her presence seemed to boost morale during the difficult rescue operations. Hope proved to be more than just a comfort. She had an uncanny ability to sense when someone was upset or stressed. When Private Rodriguez received news that his family's home had been damaged in the earthquake, Hope immediately went to his side and laid her head on his lap. When Sergeant Williams was struggling with nightmares from the traumatic scenes they encountered each day, Hope would somehow sense his distress and stay close to him during the night. Marcus began to realize that Hope wasn't just a rescued dog. She was becoming a therapy animal for his entire unit. The stress of disaster relief work was taking its toll on all the soldiers, but Hope's presence made everything more bearable. After 2 weeks in the disaster zone, Marcus received word that his unit would be rotating out in another week. The immediate rescue phase was over, and other teams would be taking over the long-term recovery efforts. Marcus should have been relieved. He was exhausted and ready to go home. But the thought of leaving Hope behind filled him with dread. He had grown incredibly attached to the golden retriever. She had become more than just a pet to him. She was a companion who had shared one of the most difficult experiences of his life. Hope seemed to sense his mood changes too. Whenever Marcus started thinking about their eventual separation, Hope would come over and rest her head against his leg, as if she could feel his sadness. Marcus started researching what would happen to Hope after his unit left. The local animal shelter had been destroyed in the earthquake, and most of the surviving animals were being cared for by overwhelmed volunteer organizations. There was a real possibility that Hope might end up abandoned again or, worse, euthanized if no one could care for her. The thought was unbearable to Marcus. He had saved Hope's life, and now she had become an essential part of his daily existence. But military regulations were strict about soldiers adopting animals during deployments. The process was complicated and expensive, involving extensive paperwork, health certifications, and transportation arrangements. Marcus spent his off-duty hours researching military pet adoption procedures. He learned that it was possible, but it required approval from his commanding officer and could take months to complete. Even then, there was no guarantee that Hope would be allowed to travel back to the United States with him. As the departure date approached, Marcus became increasingly desperate. He couldn't imagine leaving Hope behind after everything they had been through together. She had helped him cope with the trauma of the rescue operations, and he felt responsible for her well-being. Hope seemed to sense that something was changing. She started following Marcus even more closely than usual, as if she was afraid he might disappear. Her behavior broke Marcus's heart. This loyal, loving animal had already been abandoned once during the earthquake. The thought of abandoning her again was devastating. Marcus made a decision that would complicate his military career but felt absolutely necessary for his peace of mind. He was going to find a way to bring Hope home with him, no matter what it took. The dog had saved his emotional well-being during one of the most difficult periods of his life. Now it was his turn to save her. Marcus knew he needed to approach his commanding officer, Colonel Davidson, about bringing Hope home. But he also knew the conversation wouldn't be easy. Military regulations were designed to prevent exactly this kind of emotional attachment during deployments. 3 days before their scheduled departure, Marcus requested a private meeting with Colonel Davidson. The colonel was a tough, no-nonsense career military man who had served multiple deployments around the world. Marcus had tremendous respect for him, but he also knew Davidson strictly followed regulations. "Sir, I need to discuss a personal matter with you," Marcus began, standing at attention in the colonel's temporary office. "At ease, Thompson. What's on your mind?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Sir, I'd like to request permission to adopt the dog we rescued from the earthquake rubble. I want to bring her back to the States with me." Colonel Davidson's expression didn't change, but Marcus could sense his disapproval. "Thompson, you know that's not how this works. We're here on a humanitarian mission, not to collect pets." "I understand that, sir. But this dog has provided significant morale support to our unit during this deployment. She's essentially functioning as a therapy animal. Several of the men have told me she's helped them cope with the stress of the rescue operations." The colonel leaned back in his chair. "Thompson, I've seen soldiers get attached to animals before. It never ends well. These emotional attachments cloud judgment and create unnecessary complications. When we leave here in 3 days, that dog stays behind." Marcus felt his heart sink, but he wasn't ready to give up. "Sir, I've researched the military adoption procedures. There are legal ways to do this. I'm willing to handle all the paperwork and cover all the expenses myself." "The answer is no, Thompson. Final decision." Marcus left the meeting feeling defeated but not completely hopeless. He knew there were organizations that helped military personnel adopt animals they encountered during deployments. He started making phone calls during his off-duty hours, reaching out to anyone who might be able to help. His first call was to Military Working Dog Adoptions, an organization that helped retired military dogs find homes. While they typically dealt with official military working dogs rather than rescued strays, they gave him contact information for other groups that might assist. His second call was more promising. He reached Sarah Wilson at Guardians of Rescue, an organization specifically designed to help military personnel bring home animals they had bonded with during deployments. Sarah listened to Marcus's story with genuine interest. "We've handled cases like this before," Sarah explained. "The process isn't easy and it's expensive, but it's definitely possible. The biggest challenge is getting your commanding officer's approval and arranging transportation." Sarah explained that the process would involve getting Hope fully vaccinated, obtaining health certificates, arranging international transportation, and navigating customs requirements. The total cost could exceed $3,000 and there was no guarantee of success. "The timeline is also challenging," Sarah continued. "These procedures typically take 6 to 8 weeks. If your unit is leaving in 3 days, we'd need to arrange temporary care for Hope, while the paperwork is processed." Marcus felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his conversation with Colonel Davidson. At least there was a path forward, even if it was complicated and expensive. His next challenge was finding temporary care for Hope. Marcus reached out to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a local veterinarian who had been volunteering at the disaster relief site. Dr. Rodriguez had interacted with Hope several times and had commented on her exceptional temperament. "I've been thinking about what will happen to all these displaced animals," Dr. Rodriguez told Marcus. "My clinic was damaged but not destroyed. I could provide temporary care for Hope while you work on the adoption paperwork." Marcus felt like pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but he still needed to convince Colonel Davidson to reconsider his decision. Marcus decided to take a different approach. Instead of making another direct request, he gathered supporting documentation. He wrote detailed statements from several soldiers in his unit describing how Hope had positively impacted their mental health during the deployment. Private Rodriguez wrote about how Hope had comforted him after receiving bad news about his family. Sergeant Williams described how Hope's presence had helped him sleep better after traumatic rescue operations. Marcus also researched military policies on therapy animals and found several precedents where animals had been officially recognized for their contributions to troop morale and mental health. He prepared a formal proposal outlining the therapeutic benefits Hope had provided and the legal framework for military pet adoptions. 2 days before departure, Marcus requested another meeting with Colonel Davidson. This time he came prepared with documentation and a detailed plan. "Sir, I'd like you to reconsider my request regarding Hope," Marcus began. "I've prepared some documentation that I think you should see." Colonel Davidson looked annoyed. "Thompson, I thought I was clear about this." "You were, sir. But I think this situation might be different than typical cases." Marcus handed over the statements from his fellow soldiers and his research on therapy animals. The colonel read through the materials slowly. Marcus could see his expression changing as he read the statements from the other soldiers. The accounts of Hope's positive impact were compelling and detailed. After several minutes, Colonel Davidson looked up. "This is impressive documentation, Thompson. But my concerns remain the same. Military regulations exist for good reasons. I understand, sir, but I've found organizations that specialize in helping with these adoptions. All the logistics can be handled through proper channels. I'm not asking the military to pay for anything or bend any rules." Colonel Davidson was quiet for a long moment. Marcus could see him weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. "Thompson, I'm going to make an exception, but with strict conditions. You have my permission to pursue this adoption through official channels only. If you can arrange everything legally and at your own expense, I won't stand in your way. But if this creates any problems or delays for our unit, the deal is off." Marcus felt a surge of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." As Marcus left the colonel's office, he realized the real work was just beginning. He had less than 48 hours to finalize arrangements with Dr. Rodriguez and start the adoption paperwork. But for the first time in days, he felt hopeful that he and Hope might actually have a future together. The morning of departure arrived gray and overcast, matching Marcus's mood perfectly. Despite having Colonel Davidson's permission and arrangements in place with Dr. Rodriguez, the thought of leaving Hope behind was breaking his heart. He had spent the previous 2 days frantically completing paperwork and making phone calls to ensure everything was properly arranged. Dr. Rodriguez arrived at the base camp early to collect Hope and take her to the temporary care facility she had set up at her partially damaged clinic. Marcus had packed a bag with Hope's blanket, some toys that the soldiers had made for her, and enough food for several days. "Don't worry, Marcus," Dr. Rodriguez said as she prepared to take Hope. "I'll take excellent care of her. She's such a special dog. I can see why you've become so attached." Hope seemed to sense that something significant was happening. She stayed close to Marcus's side, occasionally looking up at him with those expressive brown eyes that had first captured his heart weeks ago. Marcus knelt down and wrapped his arms around her neck. "I'm coming back for you, girl," he whispered. "This isn't goodbye. It's just see you later." Hope licked his face and wagged her tail, but Marcus could see confusion in her eyes. She had been abandoned once before during the earthquake, and now her new pack was leaving her again. The thought was devastating to Marcus. As Dr. Rodriguez gently led Hope toward her vehicle, the dog kept looking back at Marcus. When she realized she wasn't going to be allowed to follow him, she began to whine softly. The sound cut through Marcus like a knife. The other soldiers gathered around to say their goodbyes to Hope. Each one had formed their own bond with the dog during their time together. Private Rodriguez knelt down and gave Hope a treat he had saved from his ration pack. "Take care of yourself, Hope," he said softly. "Thanks for everything." Sergeant Williams patted Hope's head gently. "You're a good dog, Hope. The best therapy animal we ever had." Corporal Johnson, who had helped rescue Hope from the rubble, was the last to say goodbye. "See you in America, girl," he said, though his voice cracked slightly. As Dr. Rodriguez's vehicle drove away with Hope in the back seat, Marcus felt a crushing weight in his chest. Through the rear window, he could see Hope looking back at him, her golden fur barely visible through the dusty glass. Marcus forced himself to wave, even though he felt like his heart was being torn out. The flight back to the United States was one of the longest of Marcus's life. While his fellow soldiers caught up on sleep or talked about their plans for leave, Marcus spent the time staring out the window and thinking about Hope. He wondered if she understood why he had to leave, if she felt abandoned, if she would remember him when he returned for her. Marcus had his phone packed with international calling capability, and as soon as they reached their stopover in Germany, he called Dr. Rodriguez to check on Hope. "She's doing okay," Dr. Rodriguez reported, though Marcus could hear concern in her voice. "She's eating and responding to basic commands. But she's definitely sad. She keeps looking toward the door like she's waiting for someone to come back." The news was both reassuring and heartbreaking. Marcus was glad Hope was physically healthy, but knowing she was waiting for him made the separation even more painful. When Marcus finally arrived back at his home base in North Carolina, his first priority was advancing the adoption paperwork. He had been corresponding with Sarah Wilson at Guardians of Rescue throughout his travel, and she had made significant progress on the documentation while he was in transit. The good news is that Hope's health certificates are being processed. Sarah told him during their first phone call after his return. Dr. Rodriguez has been excellent about getting all the medical requirements completed. The challenging part will be arranging transportation. Sarah explained that getting Hope from the disaster zone to the United States would require coordination between multiple organizations and government agencies. The process typically took 6 to 8 weeks under ideal circumstances, but the ongoing earthquake recovery efforts were complicating logistics. Marcus threw himself into the adoption process with the same determination he had shown during the rescue operations. He spent every free moment making phone calls, filling out forms, and following up on documentation. His friends and fellow soldiers thought he was obsessing over the situation, but Marcus couldn't let it go. 3 weeks after leaving the disaster zone, Marcus received devastating news during his weekly call with Dr. Rodriguez. "Marcus, I need to tell you something about Hope," she said, and her tone immediately put him on alert. "She's been struggling more than I initially thought. She's lost weight and she's becoming increasingly withdrawn. I think she's experiencing depression from the separation." Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach. "What does that mean? Is she going to be okay?" Dogs can definitely experience depression, especially after traumatic events and separations from bonded humans, Dr. Rodriguez explained. "I'm doing everything I can to help her, but she clearly misses you and doesn't understand why you left." Dr. Rodriguez went on to explain that Hope was eating less, sleeping more, and showing less interest in activities she had previously enjoyed. While she wasn't in immediate physical danger, her emotional state was concerning. "The best thing for her would be to reunite with you as soon as possible," Dr. Rodriguez said. "Is there any way to expedite the adoption process?" Marcus immediately called Sarah Wilson to discuss options for speeding up the timeline. Sarah was sympathetic but realistic about the challenges. "We're pushing everything as fast as we can," she said, "but some of these government processes just take time. International animal transportation has strict requirements that can't be rushed." Marcus felt helpless. Here he was, thousands of miles away. While Hope was suffering from depression because of their separation, he had saved her physical life during the earthquake, but now her emotional well-being was deteriorating because of his absence. That night, Marcus barely slept. He kept thinking about Hope waiting by the door at Dr. Rodriguez's clinic, looking for him to return. He had promised her he would come back, but the bureaucratic delays were making that promise feel hollow. Marcus realized he might need to consider more drastic options to reunite with Hope before her condition deteriorated further. The thought of losing her to depression after surviving the earthquake was unbearable. He began researching alternative approaches to bringing Hope home, even if they meant taking personal risks or making significant financial sacrifices. After sleepless nights worrying about Hope's deteriorating condition, Marcus made a bold decision. He couldn't wait for the standard adoption process to run its course while Hope suffered from depression. He requested emergency leave and used his savings to book a flight back to the earthquake zone to personally escort Hope home. Sarah Wilson from Guardians of Rescue was initially hesitant about Marcus's plan. "This is highly unusual," she said during their phone conversation. The transportation logistics are complex, and there's always a risk that customs officials could create problems. But when Marcus explained Hope's declining emotional state and his desperation to help her, Sarah agreed to work with him on an expedited plan. If you're willing to take the risks and cover the additional expenses, we can try to fast-track everything, she said. The plan was ambitious and expensive. Marcus would fly back to the disaster zone, complete the final paperwork in person, and then personally escort Hope on a commercial flight back to the United States. The total cost would exceed $5,000, representing most of Marcus's savings, but he didn't hesitate. Dr. Rodriguez was thrilled when Marcus called to tell her he was coming back. Hope needs this, she said. Her condition has gotten worse in the past few days. She's barely eating now, and she spends most of her time lying in the corner. I really think she's given up hope of seeing you again. The news made Marcus even more determined to reach Hope as quickly as possible. He arranged emergency leave with his commanding officer, booked flights, and coordinated with Sarah Wilson to have all the necessary documentation ready for his arrival. The flight back to the earthquake zone felt endless. Marcus kept checking his watch and calculating how much longer until he could see Hope again. He had been away for 5 weeks, which felt like a lifetime. He wondered if Hope would remember him, if she would be excited to see him, or if the depression had changed her too much. Dr. Rodriguez met Marcus at the small regional airport that had recently reopened after earthquake repairs. She's going to be so happy to see you, she said as they drove toward her clinic. I haven't told her you're coming because I didn't want to get her hopes up in case there were flight delays. The clinic looked different than Marcus remembered. Dr. Rodriguez had been working tirelessly to repair the earthquake damage while caring for dozens of displaced animals. The facility was clean and functional, but clearly operating under challenging conditions. She's in the back area with some of the other dogs, Dr. Rodriguez explained as they walked through the clinic. She's been very quiet lately. She responds to commands and accepts food when I hand feed her, but she lacks the enthusiasm she had when you were here. As they approached the rear of the clinic, Marcus could hear dogs barking and playing, but he didn't hear the specific bark he was listening for. Dr. Rodriguez opened a door that led to a large enclosed area where several dogs were housed. Marcus immediately spotted Hope lying in a corner by herself, separated from the other dogs. She looked thinner than he remembered, and her beautiful golden coat seemed less lustrous. She was awake but staring off into the distance with a listless expression. Hope, Marcus called softly. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Hope's head snapped up, her ears perked forward, and her eyes widened. For a moment she seemed frozen, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she scrambled to her feet and ran toward Marcus, her tail wagging so frantically that her entire body was wiggling. Marcus dropped to his knees as Hope crashed into him, covering his face with kisses and whining with excitement. Her joy was so intense that she couldn't seem to contain herself. She kept jumping up and down, spinning in circles, and pressing herself against Marcus as if she needed to confirm he was really there. I told you I'd come back for you, girl, Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion. He wrapped his arms around Hope and buried his face in her neck. The feeling of holding her again was overwhelming. Dr. Rodriguez watched the reunion with tears in her eyes. I've never seen such a dramatic change in an animal, she said. It's like she suddenly came back to life. Hope wouldn't let Marcus out of her sight for the rest of the day. She followed him everywhere, constantly touching him with her nose or paw as if she needed reassurance that he wasn't going to disappear again. When Marcus sat down, Hope immediately curled up against him. When he stood up, she was instantly at his side. The paperwork processing took 2 full days, during which Marcus stayed at a small hotel near the clinic. Hope stayed with him, and her personality continued to brighten with each passing hour. Her appetite returned, her energy increased, and her playful nature reemerged. Dr. Rodriguez was amazed by the transformation. It's like watching a completely different dog, she observed. The depression lifted almost immediately once you returned. It really shows how strong the bond between you two has become. On the 3rd day, all the documentation was finally complete. Marcus and Hope were cleared for international travel. The flight would involve 2 connections and take nearly 18 hours, but Marcus was confident they could handle it together. At the airport, Hope seemed nervous about the travel crate, but she trusted Marcus enough to enter it willingly. Marcus had arranged to have her crate positioned where he could see her throughout the flight, and he talked to her regularly to keep her calm. The journey was long and stressful, but Hope handled it better than Marcus had expected. During their layover in Amsterdam, Marcus was able to take her out of the crate for a short walk in the airport's pet relief area. Hope seemed to understand that they were traveling together toward something important. When their plane finally touched down in North Carolina, Marcus felt a surge of relief and excitement. They had made it. After weeks of separation and uncertainty, Hope was finally coming home with him. As they walked through customs, Hope stayed close to Marcus's side, occasionally looking up at him as if to confirm they were still together. The customs officials examined their paperwork carefully but found everything in order. When they finally emerged from the airport into the North Carolina sunshine, Marcus knelt down beside Hope and looked into her eyes. "Welcome to America, girl," he said. "We're home." Hope's tail wagged as she sniffed the new smells and took in the unfamiliar surroundings. But as long as Marcus was beside her, she seemed ready for whatever came next. Marcus's small apartment near the military base had never felt more like home than the day he brought Hope through the front door. He had spent the previous week preparing for her arrival, buying dog food, toys, a comfortable bed, and everything else a dog might need. But nothing had prepared him for how natural it felt to have Hope as part of his daily routine. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment for both of them. Hope was fascinated by her new environment. She had never lived in a modern apartment with carpet, air conditioning, and regular meal times. Everything was different from her previous life as a stray and her temporary stay at Dr. Rodriguez's clinic. Marcus took 2 weeks of leave to help Hope settle in and bond with her new surroundings. They established daily routines of morning walks, afternoon training sessions, and evening relaxation time. Hope proved to be an exceptionally intelligent dog who learned new commands quickly and seemed eager to please Marcus in every way. The other soldiers on base quickly learned about Hope and were curious to meet the famous rescue dog they had heard so much about. When Marcus brought Hope to the base for her first visit, she received a hero's welcome. Several of his fellow soldiers from the earthquake deployment were still stationed there, and their reunion with Hope was emotional for everyone involved. "She looks fantastic," said Corporal Johnson, who had helped rescue Hope from the rubble, much healthier and happier than when we found her. Private Rodriguez was amazed by Hope's transformation. "Remember how scared and hurt she was under that concrete? Now look at her. She's like a completely different dog." Hope seemed to remember each of the soldiers and greeted them enthusiastically. But Marcus noticed that she always stayed close to his side and kept checking to make sure he wasn't going anywhere. The separation anxiety from their time apart was still affecting her behavior. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus and Hope settled into a comfortable life together. Hope accompanied Marcus on his morning runs, waited patiently during his work hours, and provided companionship during his evening downtime. She had a calming effect on Marcus that he hadn't fully realized he needed. But Marcus began to notice some concerning changes in his own behavior and mood. The excitement of bringing Hope home had initially masked some underlying issues, but as life returned to a more normal routine, Marcus found himself struggling with unexpected emotional challenges. The earthquake deployment had been more traumatic than Marcus had initially realized. During the rescue operations, he had focused entirely on helping others and hadn't processed his own emotional responses to the devastation he witnessed. Now that he was back in a peaceful environment, the memories began to surface more frequently. Marcus started having trouble sleeping. Images from the earthquake would flash through his mind just as he was falling asleep. Collapsed buildings, injured civilians, the desperate search for survivors. He would wake up in the middle of the night feeling anxious and restless. Hope seemed to sense Marcus's distress. On nights when he couldn't sleep, she would leave her bed and come lay beside him, resting her head on his chest. Her presence was comforting, but Marcus realized that he might need professional help to work through his experiences. During the day, Marcus found himself easily startled by loud noises. The sound of construction equipment or heavy machinery would trigger memories of the earthquake and rescue operations. Sometimes he would have brief moments where he felt disconnected from his surroundings, as if he was back in the disaster zone rather than safe at home. Hope became increasingly protective of Marcus during these episodes. She seemed to recognize when he was having a difficult moment and would position herself between Marcus and whatever was bothering him. Her intuitive responses were remarkable, but they also made Marcus realize how much his emotional state was affecting both of them. Marcus's commanding officer noticed changes in his performance and demeanor. During a routine evaluation, Colonel Davidson asked if everything was okay. "You seem distracted lately, Thompson. Is everything all right at home? How's the dog working out?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "Hope is doing great, sir. Better than I expected, actually. She's adapted well to life here." "But something else is bothering you," Colonel Davidson observed. He had enough experience with soldiers returning from difficult deployments to recognize the signs of post-traumatic stress. Marcus found himself opening up about his sleeping problems, the flashbacks, and his anxiety around loud noises. Colonel Davidson listened without judgment, nodding occasionally as Marcus described his experiences. "Thompson, what you're describing sounds like a normal response to an abnormal situation," the colonel said. "That earthquake deployment was traumatic for everyone involved. Have you considered talking to someone about these experiences?" Marcus had been reluctant to seek counseling, partly because he felt he should be strong enough to handle the aftermath on his own. But his symptoms were getting worse, not better, and he was beginning to worry about how his condition might affect Hope. "I'll look into it, sir," Marcus replied. That evening, Marcus researched military mental health resources and found information about counseling services for soldiers dealing with deployment-related trauma. He was surprised to learn how common his experiences were and how effective treatment could be. Marcus made an appointment with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychologist who specialized in treating military personnel with post-traumatic stress disorder. During their first session, Dr. Walsh helped Marcus understand that his symptoms were a normal response to witnessing human suffering and devastation. Many soldiers experience these kinds of reactions after humanitarian deployments. Dr. Walsh explained, "You were exposed to traumatic situations repeatedly over several weeks. Your mind is still processing those experiences." Dr. Walsh was particularly interested in Marcus's relationship with Hope and how the dog had provided emotional support during and after the deployment. "It sounds like Hope served as an emotional anchor for you during a very difficult time," she observed. "Animals can be incredibly therapeutic for people dealing with trauma, but it's important that you don't rely solely on her for emotional support." Through several counseling sessions, Marcus began to develop better coping strategies for dealing with his post-traumatic stress symptoms. Dr. Walsh taught him relaxation techniques, helped him process his memories of the earthquake, and worked with him to reduce his anxiety responses. Hope continued to be a source of comfort and stability throughout Marcus's healing process. But Marcus also noticed that as his emotional state improved, Hope seemed more relaxed too. She had been absorbing his stress and anxiety, which had been affecting her own well-being. During their therapy sessions, Dr. Walsh often asked about Hope's behavior and role in Marcus's daily life. She was fascinated by the dog's intuitive responses to Marcus's emotional state and suggested that Hope might benefit from formal therapy dog training. "She already has many of the natural instincts and temperament traits that make excellent therapy animals," Dr. Walsh observed. "With proper training, she could potentially help other people who are dealing with trauma." The idea intrigued Marcus. Hope had already helped him and his fellow soldiers cope with the stress of their deployment. Perhaps she could extend that gift to other people who needed emotional support. Marcus began researching therapy dog certification programs in their area. He learned that the process involved extensive training for both the dog and handler, background checks, and evaluations to ensure the animal was suitable for therapeutic work. As Marcus's mental health improved through counseling, and as he explored new possibilities for Hope's future, he felt like they were both healing together. The experiences that had initially seemed like only painful memories were beginning to transform into something meaningful and purposeful. But Marcus had no idea that their journey together was about to take a dramatic and heartbreaking turn that would test everything they had built together. 8 months after bringing Hope home, Marcus noticed subtle changes in her behavior that initially seemed minor but gradually became more concerning. Hope had always been an energetic dog who loved their daily runs and play sessions, but she began showing less enthusiasm for physical activities. At first, Marcus attributed this to the natural settling process of adjusting to domestic life. During one of their morning runs, Hope stopped unexpectedly and sat down on the trail, panting heavily. This was unusual because she typically had excellent endurance and could easily complete their regular 3-mile route. Marcus initially thought she might be having an off day or perhaps the weather was too warm. "Come on, girl," Marcus encouraged, but Hope seemed reluctant to continue. She stood up slowly and managed to finish the run, but at a much slower pace than usual. Over the next few weeks, Hope's energy levels continued to decline gradually. She still greeted Marcus enthusiastically when he returned from work, still enjoyed their training sessions, and still provided emotional support when he was having difficult days. But Marcus could sense that something wasn't quite right. Hope began sleeping more during the day and seemed less interested in her favorite toys. She still ate her meals, but with less enthusiasm than before. Most concerning to Marcus, she started having occasional episodes where she would suddenly stop walking and sit down, as if she needed to rest. Marcus decided to take Hope to Dr. Rachel Martinez, a local veterinarian who had experience treating military working dogs. Dr. Martinez conducted a thorough examination, checking Hope's heart rate, breathing, joint mobility, and overall condition. "She seems to be in generally good health," Dr. Martinez said after the initial exam. "Her weight is appropriate, her coat looks healthy, and I don't see any obvious signs of injury or illness. But I'd like to run some blood tests and take some x-rays to rule out any underlying conditions." Marcus felt somewhat reassured by the preliminary findings, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Hope's behavior changes were subtle but persistent, and Marcus had learned to pay attention to her moods and patterns. The blood test results came back normal, showing no signs of infection, organ dysfunction, or nutritional deficiencies. The x-rays of Hope's joints and bones also appeared normal, ruling out arthritis or structural problems that might explain her decreased activity levels. "Everything looks good so far," Dr. Martinez reported. "Let's monitor her for another few weeks and see if her symptoms improve. Sometimes dogs go through temporary phases of lower energy, especially as they adjust to new routines." But Hope's condition didn't improve. If anything, her symptoms became more pronounced. She began having more frequent episodes where she would suddenly stop during walks and need to rest. Her breathing sometimes seemed labored, even during light activity. Marcus brought Hope back to Dr. Martinez for a follow-up appointment 3 weeks later. This time, Dr. Martinez conducted more specialized tests, including an electrocardiogram, to check Hope's heart function and additional blood work to look for more subtle abnormalities. The results of these tests revealed the devastating truth that would change everything for Marcus and Hope. Dr. Martinez called Marcus that evening with news that would shatter his world. "Marcus, I need you to come in tomorrow so we can discuss Hope's test results in person," Dr. Martinez said, and her tone immediately told Marcus that the news wasn't good. "Can't you tell me over the phone?" Marcus asked, though part of him already dreaded hearing the answer. "I think it's better if we discuss this face to face. Can you come in first thing in the morning?" Marcus barely slept that night. Hope seemed to sense his anxiety and stayed close to him, occasionally nudging his hand with her nose as if trying to provide comfort. Marcus held her close, fearing what the morning might bring. At the veterinary clinic the next day, Dr. Martinez's expression confirmed Marcus's worst fears before she even began speaking. "Marcus, Hope has dilated cardiomyopathy," she said gently. "It's a serious heart condition that affects the heart's ability to pump blood effectively." Marcus felt like the world had stopped spinning. "What does that mean? Can it be treated?" Dr. Martinez explained that dilated cardiomyopathy was a progressive disease that weakened the heart muscle over time. While medications could help manage the symptoms and slow the progression, there was no cure. "How long does she have?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's difficult to predict," Dr. Martinez replied. "With proper medication and care, some dogs can live comfortably for months or even a year or two. But the disease will eventually progress to heart failure." The irony was devastating. Marcus had saved Hope from the physical trauma of the earthquake, had fought through bureaucratic obstacles to bring her home, had helped her overcome separation anxiety and depression. They had built a beautiful life together, with Hope providing emotional support that had helped Marcus heal from his own trauma. Now, just as everything seemed perfect, Hope was facing a battle that Marcus couldn't fight for her. All his military training, his determination, his willingness to sacrifice everything for her well-being. None of it could change the fact that her heart was failing. Dr. Martinez prescribed medications to help manage Hope's symptoms and improve her quality of life. She also provided Marcus with detailed information about managing a dog with heart disease, including dietary recommendations, exercise limitations, and warning signs to watch for. The most important thing now is to focus on making whatever time you have together as comfortable and meaningful as possible, Dr. Martinez said. Hope doesn't know she's sick. She only knows that she loves you and wants to spend time with you. As Marcus drove home with Hope sitting beside him in the passenger seat, he struggled to process this new reality. The dog who had saved his emotional well-being was now the one who needed saving, and there was nothing he could do to change the outcome. Hope looked over at him and wagged her tail, completely unaware that their time together had suddenly become precious and limited. In that moment, Marcus realized that his mission had changed. He was no longer focused on building a future with Hope. Instead, he was determined to make every remaining day they had together count. The soldier, who had once saved a dog's life, now faced the heartbreaking task of helping that same dog live fully in the shadow of an incurable disease. Their greatest challenge lay ahead, and this time, love and determination might not be enough to win the battle.